when everybody in a vault dies a horrific death, it's usually Vault-Tec's fault, either due to the frequently inhumane experiments they conduct on the unsuspecting population, or because of some shoddy engineering work, or both. But the blame can generally be laid at their feet. Well, today it's a little different. Today the blame lies solely with the worst system of governance we have, except, literally every other one. Yes, you guessed it right. Today, democracy killed the Vault. Or more specifically, the way democracy evolved and ended up being implemented killed the Vault. Or perhaps it's more accurate to say how it reverted. The form it took wasn't anything new, but old. The same system we're all too familiar with. Ape is elected to represent the people. Ape like power. Ape finds other ape to blame for problems they caused or failed to solve. Ape keep power. Apes, yes plural now, get opportunity for new governance. Turn on ape. Ape burns down entire forest. You know the story. Today we'll see how the Vault experiment took the form of a single lie, and from there a democratic system emerged. And then, like it always does, a cancer began to spread, in the form of voter blocks, i.e. ape, wielding power and warping people's perception of their fellow dwellers, all to keep said power and control. Apologies this video took so long, my life's been a bit crazy, but I planned things out so the next video will be sooner. If you enjoy this video, please like and comment so the almighty algorithm may look us favourably upon it. If you would like to see more of these quite old videos being remade to a better standard, let me know what you want to see, as Vault 92 is next. But let's get back to the Vault. When we arrive in the aftermath, it's all already over, so it remains not to find out how all this ended, but how it started. Like many of the vaults that we come across, this vault employs the greatest of subterfuge and security to hide and protect its entrance. A mound of dirt that, if you're feeling charitable, you could call a hill, and a door that looks flimsy enough that a swift boot would topple it. Also weird contrast that many of the vaults just have these out of place, yet nondescript entrances, but others have the vault door outside, or even a cool elevator, like in Vault 111. Moving down the entrance tunnel, we come to the vault door, now ajar, indicating that whatever life was here has likely left, or more likely, let's be honest, ended horribly. This is quickly confirmed to us by the skeletons lying just inside the vault door. Ignore the mantises, they're just squatters. There are a total of 4 skeletons sprawled in the stairs leading up into the vault, and from the bloodstains and the 10mm pistol lying here, we can assume they were shot and killed here, either by someone lying here, or someone that left. But already this scene tells a story, one that didn't have a happy ending, at least for these 4. And like many of the vaults we see, the first story we encounter is usually a pretty good indicator of the tone of the rest. Now the door's ajar, and the locals have moved in. Again, never an indicator that the rest of the vault is doing well. The vault door being open usually means the dwellers unlocked it, as external access was generally a challenge. Now there's only 1 pistol, so it leaves the question of how they died. It doesn't appear they were fleeing the vaults, and none of them are armed, save this pistol. So why did they all just stand there and let themselves be killed? It also means the shooter, whoever they were, had to have turned the gun on themselves if they didn't leave the vault. But what the hell could have happened here that they take such an extreme measure? Well, we do get the first piece of the puzzle on a terminal here, in the form of the vault entrance security recording. Now it does raise more questions than it answers, but let's take a listen first.
Are we really gonna do this? It's open, we could just leave.
I couldn't, not after that.
We don't deserve to leave. A shining example. That's what it called us. But we did what we were supposed to. Not by a long shot. Anybody would have done what we did.
You ask me? That's exactly the problem. Now let's get on with this.
I'll go first. Wait. People should know what happened. They could learn from it. If there's anyone out there at all, I hope they never have to find out. Ready, Harry? Yeah. No, wait!
So we heard 4 voices, 3 men and a woman, and what's immediately clear is they were the only 4 here, and that they chose to be killed. They decided they didn't deserve to leave because of a choice they made, and because of this choice, well, something called them a shining example. We'll get back to what that something could be later. But the vault was unlocked, or at least it sounds like it was just opened, and they still made this choice. So whatever they did, that, according to one of them, is what they were meant to do, they couldn't leave. They felt they didn't deserve to. Now if they are all that's left, then whatever happened killed everybody else in the vaults, and they appear to have played some role in it. Only one of them, Harry, is named, and he, one of the other men and the woman seem very resigned to their fate. You can hear it too, in their voices, the hopelessness. The last one, on the other hand, just wants to leave, and they even try to justify it by saying people could learn from their actions that apparently anyone would do, and this is what it all comes back to. Whatever happened here, it seems to have been as a result of the expected actions of the dwellers, and even more, actions that anyone else would take if they were put in the same position. So the ones that chose to die seem to have done so out of shame that this is all that they, and perhaps the rest of the vaults, amounted to. Now it's a little bit odd that this recording exists at all. It's found on the terminal, but they were all shot past it on the stairs. Also one of them, not Harry and not the one that wanted to leave, I think, was still alive after the shots rang out, going off of the exhale. So was he just gut shots, and if so, were they the shooter? It seems like a strange way to choose to willfully exit the world, is all I'm saying. Just keep all this in the back of your mind, as we're going to return to the possibility of there being someone else much later. Before we head into what you could call the first floor foyer, we can take a look around this room, as it holds a huge amount of information on what was going on here. On all the walls, we see what looks like election or campaign posters. You know the kind, where the opponent is slandered, usually with a baseless inflammatory statement, but it's phrased like an opinion, so you can avoid being sued. If you are unfamiliar with these types of campaign posters, it's because they're more regulated in your country, but people in the US and the UK will be all too familiar with this type of trash. But on inspection, something isn't right. They aren't mudslinging to convince you not to vote for someone, they're doing it so you will, or they're reassuring you of their upstanding character so you won't vote for them. Apparently there's some baseless rumours swirling around regarding Haley, and we should ignore them and vote for Stone instead. But a vote for what? Well, Overseer, of course. Wait, what? No, we read that correctly. Look, it says Overseer. But Haley doesn't want to be Overseer. They want you to vote for someone called Stone instead. Next to it, we're told Glover's apparently a family man, and a vote for him will deprive his family of them. This one's a little more ominous, and it's the first indicator we get that something's wrong. It implies something bad would happen to him if he's elected Overseer, the same reason why Haley didn't want to be elected either. Across the room we are told to hate Nate by a poster on the right. Well, okay then, he's probably an arsehole like the rest of the vault. Easily done. Next to that, we get the full accusations about Haley. She's apparently an adulteress and a communist. So some red scare and a bit of misogyny thrown in there, for good measure. Lastly, we're told that Glover's done nothing wrong, and to vote for Stone, the second poster to tell us to do so. But as we'll see later, it's actually the third, telling us he didn't do anything wrong, so we shouldn't vote for him, which implies the vote is something you deserve if you're a bad person, or that the results of it were more of a punishment than anything else. Keep that in mind. So we've got 4 candidates: Haley, Glover, Stone, and Nate. Or at least we have 4 names. But how does this link into the scene at the entrance? Well, the only thing to do is step into the rest of the vaults and poke around. Since it would appear violence has been conducted at a large scale, and we only saw the edge of it at the entrance, it makes sense to hit up the clinic directly opposite the vault entrance. Inside, well, it's worse. There's 4 bodies, or at least the skeletal torsos of them, and the limbs either from these skeletons or from others. 2 of them are lying on tables surrounded by blood, with a third also covered in blood. There's only a single proper clinic bed here, behind the dividers, and the others are pretty haphazard. To me, this would suggest they were brought in such numbers that they were treated on these tables. Or, you know, they left them to die, as they didn't have the capacity to properly treat this many patients. Which, given the supposed population here, is a little surprising, but we'll get to that. These people were also injured somehow, which again means that something or someone was killing people here. This could have spread to this clinic, which means they could have been injured, been brought here, and then later finished off. This would then put the actions here in a more cutthroat or ruthless light, to say the least, as it kind of takes things from just a simple altercation to, well, full-on extermination. All we know so far is that those who chose to end it all rather than leave did so because of a choice they made, and that there was a vote before that happened to determine the next Overseer, so they seem to be connected. Outside of the clinic we can find some more posters, all the same except that we can see that one of the ones of Nate now says Kate. So 5 names now, and presumably something's occurred that Nate's no longer in the running, or Kate entered the running and they just amended Nate's posters to target her instead. But it seems more personal, angrier. Although it could be said that pretty much calling Haley a whore is already plenty personal. Also, I'd like to point out the ridiculousness of those claims. Like, communist sympathizer? Really? We don't know how long this vault's been operating, but the idea that even have communists to sympathize with, or a party to support, or even those viewpoints is pretty far-fetched. It would also suggest the consequences for being Overseer were even worse, as if they all hated communists so much, why would they put one in charge? A little further past the posters, if you squint into the darkness of the lady's shitter, you'll see a lone plunger on the ground. Again, now, as an age has passed, an indicator of tomfoolery afoot. Also, I think it's pretty funny, the ladies' toilet's relatively tidy, but the gents just has posters up everywhere. It would be even better if the posters were just eye level above the urinals, reminding you to hate Nate and Kate, and that Haley is allegedly a Jezebel. Which could even be true, but I mean, come on, let the woman do what she wants. As we'll get to, they probably needed a lot more of that in this vault. Past the clinic, down the hall to the right, we can come to the section of the vault that houses the only classroom. But most importantly, the cigar room as well. Just to add to the whole fat cat corruption of it all. Ignore the body at the end of the corridor, we'll get to that. Now the classroom here has but 9 chairs in it, and as stated was the only one. I can only surmise then, given how many kids some people had, and how many they would require for this vault, that the younglings sat like Goombas on top of each other, or as if they were trying to sneak into a movie in a trench coat. I mean, even for an initially small population, how would this be enough to manage even one generation of growth after they got locked in the vaults? It also brings up that very disturbing question that comes up in most vaults. What happened to all the kids if everyone is dead? But that's a question we can't answer yet. What we can do is take a look at the terminal to start fleshing out the story here. The first entry here is the voter guide, and in it we can finally get the answer to the posters, although the mention of Overseer pretty much confirmed it. The vault had some sort of democratic system in place, a voting system that was overseen by something called the Vote 11 voting blocks. Remember when we mentioned groups forming to take advantage of a system designed to give power to the people? Yes, it's these arseholes, and it gets worse from here. They have spent several years in great contemplation, with likely half of their members succumbing to aneurysms, to divine an acronym to please those with frontal lobes possessing of a high reflective index, the Dweller's official guide to obtaining overseers democratically, or do good. So chosen so you won't interrogate your actions too closely to see if they actually are. The key goal being the election of an overseer, and so that you, fine dweller, don't hurt yourself. They've done the thinking for you, telling you who to vote based on incorrect information and stances on cherry-picked issues, saving you the trouble of thinking for yourself. This is all from Roy Gottlieb? I don't know. The chairman of the voting blocks and the president of the Justice Bloc. Again, another name chosen to tell you how to think, as it implies any choice they make is the right one. Also, this lad is a colossal shit, as we shall see. The first candidate is Henry Glover, endorsed by 3 blocks, the Utilitarian Bloc, Divine Will Bloc, and the Allied Service Workers Bloc. So we have a list of 4 so far, and at least one of them is religious. You get one guess who. Also, notice who didn't endorse him. That's right, the Justice Bloc, as the vote for Overseer isn't something you'd actually want, and as we'll see, they had a lot of sway. Now straight away, for the sake of the resources of the vault, somebody vote this man in, as he is a total rabbit. Jesus H., a father of 6. He's taken up 2/3 of the classroom already. It's a wonder the Divine Will Bloc voted for him at all. He's been very fruitful. His children are quite varied in age, with the youngest being only a few months and the oldest presumably entering adulthood. He tries to guilt-trip the voters by saying, think of your own children. Now this statement's pretty telling, as if he's using it as an angle, it implies the statement would resonate with a lot of voters, which implies a lot of them have kids, or at least enough of them for this to be a valid strategy. But if he has 4 other kids and one of them hasn't even graduated yet, then the hell are these kids going to school? Again, this all comes back to the space problem that the majority of vaults have, but don't you worry, we're going to overanalyze the shit out of it anyway. He finished by saying vote for Nate Stone, which eliminates one of the candidates in the posters, as both Stone and Nate were referring to the same person. Also, a baby will bond with a colourful piece of fabric. It eventually parroting back data after you chanted to it for 3 hours is not a bond. After Henry, we come to the communist adulteress herself, and she is storming. She's got 2 endorsements, the Human Dignity Bloc and the United Vault Technicians Bloc, all different from Henry. This actually really starts to highlight the blocks were not a united front in the slightest, also how varied the process seemed to be, which means it's either a handful of dwellers per block, or the numbers really are bigger. She maintains that not only did she not do some unspeakable act, it certainly did not occur 5 times. I assume she's been accused of making the beast of 2 or more backs 5 or less times. She's right, of course. She can do whatever the fuck she wants, and that shouldn't result in whatever punishment comes with the office of Overseer. But this is only the start of the large amount of evidence we're going to come across, that really this is all a popularity contest, which heavily mirrors real life. She tries to assure people that she is grossly underqualified, which is certainly not a mirror of real life, because an underqualified person saying the opposite is far more common IRL. But it does confirm to us at least that, regardless of what eventually did happen to the Overseer that all of them want to avoid, some power was wielded. The actual position of Overseer was occupied in somewhat of its managerial capacity for some period of time. The final entry is from the hated man himself, Nathan Stone, endorsed by the villains of this story, the ironically named Justice Bloc. Only one single endorsement, which really makes it feel more personal, and his entire entry confirms this. He calls out the dirty backroom politics, which has to be a reference directly to the Justice Bloc. He says they should all be ashamed of themselves, and yeah, as we'll see, that doesn't even begin to cover it, which will become clear as we go deeper in. But these are the candidates, the final candidates, those who took part in the election that was the staple of this vault, lying and smearing their competition, all to avoid the office of Overseer, which means there must have been some horrific downside. Given Glover's poster of his family needing him, it implies that whatever would happen to them would take him from them, which narrows it down, but we can widely speculate on it more as we go. The entry after this one is titled Notice of Postponement, and this was the beginning of the end. Some murders, plural, have occurred, and due to it, the voting blocs decided to postpone the election, pending an investigation. The end of the entry actually adds to the confusion about this unwanted job, as they say the killer might be a candidate for Overseer. So again, whatever happens to the Overseer is so awful, the voters would actually consider using the position itself as punishment, as opposed to more traditional means. A strange move to make given the Overseer does indeed have some power, and one could expect retribution. Well, this is exactly what happens, which we see after the president of the coalition, Terry Hart, signs off. The last entry we get is Overseer Order 745, and it dumps a lot on us. First off, we're told how often this election occurs, every single year, which means the Overseer has a term of exactly 1 year before whatever happens, well, happens. And let's be honest, you've probably got an idea of what it is by now. Going forward, someone will be chosen 1 month prior using a random number generator, ending the voting process and effectively killing off the voting blocs, and also the power they wielded. What's funny is the Overseer is actually Catherine Stone, who we can assume is related to Nathan Stone in some manner. And we've also just been told the vote was postponed because people were being killed, and the killer might offer a replacement candidate. Catherine wasn't even nominated by any of the blocs before this point. Additionally, we know her name was scrawled over that of Nate's, who seems to have been targeted for the position of Overseer. All of this makes Catherine seem quite guilty, but that means that knowing all of that, the Dweller still voted her in, and the position did come with some real actual power, which we get confirmation of. Which, I mean, if you weren't someone that crossed her, you probably don't care, especially given we don't know who died yet. But what is clear is she made a sweeping change, and that Nate likely avoided the fate of Overseer because she was chosen. We know he spoke out against them, and maybe she decided enough was enough, and she was going to do something about it. We'll need to head deeper into the vault to find out more, but before that, we can head out of the classroom and take a look at that body we saw earlier. It's an NCR trooper, and it's not exactly a big mystery how they died. The mantises and the rats did him in. Typical. What is a little harder to answer is what they were doing here. This is a vault, so exploring it isn't exactly unheard of. I mean, we're literally here right now, but it is a little odd why they're here all by themselves, and not with a squad to back them up. There are no other bodies in the vault this fresh, so if they did come with other people, then they were the only ones to die. Also, we do find some evidence that someone else has been in the vaults, which we'll get to. This means he, or those that left him here, are the likely culprits. Past that body is what I think is an excellent example of the corruption and power wielded in this vault, in the most stereotypical fashion, apart from what we find later. A cigar room. Now, I am not saying the people who smoke cigars are evil, not at all. But at the very least, it does seem to be the choice of way to shorten your lifespan by a lot of groups that wield political power corruptly. Now, it could be this was just an ordinary room that anyone could use, but the fact that the only poster in here is for Nate, and the other rooms have so many, makes me think the Justice Bloc was in control of this room, or at least that the Bloc representatives met here. Otherwise, it's a very odd room to have sitting here with literally no other context. Since the whole theme of this vault is political corruption, I think all these backroom dealers meeting here over cigars to choose who to put forward makes sense. Heading down the stairs beside the large wall filled with posters, we can enter the laboratory of the vault. It's pretty, well, underwhelming, if I'm being honest, with only a terminal with the same entries as the one upstairs present. I think places like this in vaults are a bit of a feeling, as they really had the opportunity to really flesh out the day-to-day here. We do get a lot of information going forward, but I mean, come on, don't just give us an empty room. More is always better. Further down we get to the computer room, and in it I had some PTSD flashbacks to my time in primary school surrounded by CRT monitors and MS Word. Here we find a light hooked up to a car battery, one of the signs of life I talked about, because otherwise it's pretty weird, as the power's working fine when we get here. We can see this come up a few times as we continue our journey, but for now, we don't know who this was, or how long ago the vault fell, so we'll head down into the residential quarters to try and get some of that information. The scene here is not any better than upstairs, although there are a few changes between the two. We've got a shit little shop on the left here that seems to sell crutches and glass bottles, Thrilling stuff. Or, this is all that was left after everything metaphorically caught fire. But at this point my opinion's pretty low. We've got 3 options for the doors, but it's the male and female dorms we'll focus on first. Yeah, that's right. They had them separate, as the mixing of man and woman is forbidden. Also, who the fuck broke down this metal door that recedes into the ceiling? Like, this seems like it would be far harder than, I don't know, just forcing the door upwards? This seems like something that was done by a pissed mob that at a certain point were just too committed to change their actions. Anyway, we can head down into these dorms to see how these Morlocks were living. The male dorm has a whopping 4 rooms, with a total of 8 beds, 2 per room. Now these beds don't seem large enough for more than one person, and still be comfortable, so this again raises the problem of population and how it was being maintained. Yeah, I know, engine limitations of the game, but a load of empty rooms is hardly a difficult thing to manage, and when we start counting bodies later, it gets a little more confusing. We're up to a total of 8 dweller bodies so far, by the way. Also, they still have posters for the votes about people's beds, which, I know there's election, I know it's important, but they don't need to fall asleep thinking about it as well. The only other room down here helps fill in some of the blanks with the whole block situation. The room is plastered in Justice Bloc posters, and we can find out why very quickly by looking at the terminal here, the password for which can be found in the room. It's Roy Gottlieb himself, the man who prepared the do-good entry, and the head of the Justice Bloc, explaining why all these posters are here. It's their headquarters, in someone's bedroom they share with another person. Magnificent. On it, we find a security tape with a conversation between Roy and someone else.
She can't do this. It's done. We're done. Nothing's done. She's got the authority. The only thing she can't do is change her own fate. Nothing says she can't change the selection process for future overseers. I say she can't. You shouldn't have toyed with her like that, Roy. We still have the majority. We don't vote for anything anymore. I'm not talking about voting. What then? You want to have a sit-in? A hunger strike? Not exactly. Maybe march into her office with torches and pitchforks? Yes. Come on. I mean it. What? Start a revolution? Laws don't outlast their governments. Roy, all we have to do is wait until someone from Justice Bloc gets picked for overseer. Then we have them change the law back. There won't be any blocks after the new overseer is picked tomorrow. Everyone's going to move on. By the time we've reformed, who knows if we'll still be in the majority? We can hold the block together. You don't know that. Besides, what if the computer picks you? What if it picks me? And your solution is to start shooting? Not if we don't have to. Look, we arm up. We go to the lower floors, take some strategic targets. Power, food, water. Just until she turns authority over to us. The other blocks won't support it. They're tired of us having the power. We have the majority. We don't need them. This isn't a vote, Roy. They'll fight back. They've never had the nerve. Hell of a way to test it.
So okay, folks. I think it's safe to say that the people of the Vault were what killed the Vault. What a shocking, rare, and unforeseen turn of events. Fucking Vault-Tec. But seriously, it sounds like taking a few strategic locations and the other blocks not having the nerve to fight back went down like a lead balloon. Things escalated quickly, so this happened the day before the Overseer was going to be picked. Now he says the new Overseer is going to be picked tomorrow, but Catherine already passed the law to effect this change, and could only have done so after she had gained power, i.e. had been picked. So I think this was 11 months after, and this has to be the first randomly selected Overseer. This is all going off of Order 745, that says the new Overseer is picked 1 month before, but it is a little odd that they've waited so long to do anything, or that they're only getting outraged about this now. Also, there were no more entries regarding this in this period of time on any of the terminals, so this leaves us 2 options. Option 1 is all of this happened much closer to the time when Catherine was originally elected, and the time given in the terminal is wrong, otherwise the outrage is a little late. Option 2 is she waited until just before the automated election would have to happen, then changed the rules, and just sat back and watched it all go up in flames. Regardless, whoever Roy is having the conversation with thinks this might be due to Roy toying with Catherine, and given we know there was some backroom dealing going on, well, this must tie in somehow. He also brings up something interesting several times. The majority. This all comes back to the Justice Bloc being the most powerful voting bloc, which means that, generally, whoever they endorsed likely got elected, and Catherine was going to take that power from them. Old Roy boy here couldn't let that happen. His plan was to take control of the key resources of the vault to get her to hand over authority. But if the election's tomorrow, I don't know if this would work. Does the computer only accept whoever is automatically chosen, or can they just ignore it as long as someone is appointed? If the latter, this makes sense. Take control, get the old system back in place, then just elect someone again. But then couldn't they just do this anyway? i.e. ignore the rules and elect somebody? It seems like they can't, which would imply the vault system would only accept the newly elected overseer via this method. Then of course they can't be sure the next overseer would change it back. Odd that no one thought to do this in the entire history of the vaults, but we'll get to that. The other person Roy's talking to is correct that assuming people won't fight back is a gamble, and the gamble clearly didn't pay off. Also, Roy, you can go royally fuck yourself. You were a colossal piece of shit, as we'll see. Moving on to the female dorm, there isn't much to see, as it's got the same setup as the male dorm. 4 rooms and 2 beds to a room, so we have it confirmed. 16 beds in the vaults, no more. So far we have Henry Glover and his brood of 6, Roy and his mysterious co-conspirator, Nate and Kate, Haley, Trevor and Harry, named in the recording at the start. 14 people named, which means logically this vault had room for 2 more. Just keep that in mind. There's also just this sign that apparently designates one of the rooms in the female dorm as the ladies' toilets. Now, I don't know if people just walked in, pissed and shit on the floor, or used a bucket. But at least for the women, one of the rooms was dedicated. The men just had to hold it. Back upstairs, we can head to the admin section of the vaults, and this will connect us to the lower levels where things start really heating up. But before that, we go right towards the security section of the vaults to see what they were packing that likely got stolen for Roy's little insurrection. Now it looks like the storage room for security is pretty ransacked, but there is still some ammo here. Specifically, this ridiculously high caliber ammunition here in the shelves and in the other room. This doesn't randomly spawn, mind you. This is in the overworld. So the vaults seem to have a strangely high amount of firepower, or at least the ammunition for it, but I have a theory for that as well. Inside the next room we can find a terminal, and there's a new entry on it, called Deposition. It's the deposition of Catherine Stone, conducted by Vault attorney Jared Miles, and it sadly confirms what we have started to suspect. Kate had a discussion, or as the attorney puts it, an alleged discussion with Roy Gottlieb, although Roy of course denies this happened. In this discussion, Roy told Catherine that they planned to endorse her husband Nate. She believes it was because Nate was on a winning streak in a poker game with a few of them, and again, this implies there are quite a few people in the block. Roy told Catherine that he could sway the block from endorsing Nick in exchange for favors. Favors that will unfortunately get this video demonetized if I talk about them. God, I really hate sometimes what this platform's become. But if she did this for himself, the rest of the leadership and their friends, he'd save Nate from endorsement. Jesus Christ. And because of this majority that keeps coming up, if they did put him forward, he'd definitely be elected. So she was left with no choice but to put up with this indignity. This, well, again, I can't say the word. Let's say non-consensual situation, for a month. Being debased and used, all to protect her husband, who I think we can assume knew eventually, but maybe not before he was endorsed. This is what the voice meant when it said Roy had toyed with her. He never had any intention of honouring this agreement. So Catherine came up with a better plan. Burn it all down and salt the ashes. She decided to start killing the block members, which confirms the murders that stopped the elections were indeed conducted by her. She says the majority was slim, so all she had to do was thin things out. But again, how many did she kill? As they definitely need to have more than a handful of people for a block. And from what she's described, they only had a slim majority. And there were also several other parties as well. Keep in mind as well, she had relations with several people. There's only 8 beds in the men's dorm, so unless some were women, was it most of the male population of the vaults? I know you're probably sick of me bringing up the population issues, but I just want to highlight them now, so when we do talk about them, you've got the correct context. The last page of this entry is fantastic. She did all of this to get elected, knowing she'd be caught, as people would see her in a bad enough light that they'd have a clear conscience, due to whatever happens to the overseer. Something so bad, they'd still put a murderer in charge. She's just so convinced it will happen, and she's completely right. Even stranger is that Roy Gottlieb also thought they would elect the murderer as well, before they'd been caught. Moron. I wonder if they still endorsed her after they found out who it was, and it just never occurred to the wee bastard that she'd actually visit some kind of consequence on him. I bet he didn't. It would be even better if he didn't want her to be elected, and she was anyway. It's a wonder no other overseer seems to have tried this, or at least if there were consequences, the fallout from the action wasn't such that the vault fell. Also, with Jared Miles, we're up to 15 people named. You're probably thinking right about now that very little has been found that is redeeming about this vault. Correct. I've got no other statements on that. Thus far, we've seen very little that is. We'll just have to keep going and pray to Jesus there's something. And it's towards the Overseer's office this takes us. to the deepest levels of the vault where the key control points were supposedly going to be taken. Down here we encounter a fork in our path. One leads us directly to the Overseer's office, and the other even deeper into the vaults, to see more of the fall here and the people that caused it. As usual, we'll save the Overseer for now, and head down into the vault, specifically towards the utilities section of the vault, and it's here where the bodies start piling up. Praise Ra. As we arrive, we see a tripwire across the door, and to the immediate left a table where someone either lay bleeding on it before it was flipped, or was shot while in front of it. Possibly, and likely, the body we find behind it. This looks like it was one of the dwellers making a stand in this room, which looks like it was a generator room, or something related to that. On the other side, we find some sandbags stacked in front of another door, this one with a single body behind it, and two in front. There's also this untriggered trip-fall trap using a metal girder. Why the fuck was this put here? Surely there were better options than using a battering ram like a trap. Like, oh I don't know, a rig gun like we see in other places and possibly literally this room? I mean, you could just stand to the side to avoid it. Behind this one is another sandbag barricade and 3 more bodies. So a total of 3 barricades, with one of them looking pretty makeshift. 2 doors trapped and 4 bodies behind said barricades, 3 in front. All of this screams standoff, and that makes perfect sense. These people were likely in the Justice Bloc, and under Roy Boy's orders, took control of the room. I think the 2 by the metal beam tripwire probably got killed trying to get into the room by the 3rd behind it. The same with the one in front of the other barricade. One of the bodies behind that one could have also been someone trying to get in. We can't be sure. What's important is everyone died here, and it seems like it was while they were fighting over resources. It would stand to reason, as these dwellers likely never saw real combat, so wouldn't really know how to survive it. It also means Roy's big gamble didn't pay off. The other blocks did fight back. A lot. Counting these bodies, we're up to 15, so almost at full capacity before it's 2 or more to a single bed. There's also a light hooked up to a battery here, which is a little odd, as they still had power in this section of the vaults. So this may have been the other group that came in and left, abandoning that NCR trooper. Past this room, we can start to see some sections of the vault that have succumbed to flooding, with this section being completely underwater and irradiated. This is probably the water treatment section, or something else related to the plumbing, given it's completely submerged, but when we go through the 2 rooms we can find here, oddly enough there are no barricades, bodies or blood, so this doesn't seem to have been considered strategic for the Justice Bloc, or they felt they'd be spread too thin to cover all the sections, although we can find 1 ammo container. So it could be it was being held at one point during all the fighting, but then they fell back to more secure points. Given you're essentially trapped here once you go down, that makes sense. Even further down, we come to the entryway to the reactor. This of course then begs the question, what the room with the generators was then, but they seem to have decided they needed to control all of them. However, the leaking water we just talked about was not playing nice with the reactor, as the upper levels of this area are all flooded with knee-high radioactive water, which tells us the reactor is also likely leaking at this point. The room is also another room the Justice Bloc barricaded, and they seem to have made somewhat of a final stand, as it's the most barricaded out of any of the rooms in the vaults, although it didn't do much good in the end. There are a total of 4 bodies in here, bringing the total to 19, and we've officially run out of beds, people. Time for sleepovers. Now they could have died of the radiation, but I doubt they would have just sat here in the water like this, especially given the ones downstairs. Heading down, we can see this section, like before, is completely submerged as well. We can find another barricade in the corner giving line of sight to both doorways, and another 2 bodies here. There's more supplies in the next room, so either these 2 killed each other, or they died of the water, which, I mean, that seems pretty unlikely, as they only had to move several meters to get out. I think the large structure connected to the ceiling in this room was the reactor, although nothing here indicates you could actually take control of it. All in all, the Justice Bloc either moved swiftly to barricade these regions, or the rest of the vault was slow to respond. Regardless, the fighting seems to have started further up and spread down, getting closer and closer to the last of the vital control points. Heading past the reactor room, we can find the last strategic location in the vault, and probably the biggest shit show outside the Overseer's office, or at least what's under it, the cafeteria. The windows here have also been reinforced, so they've considered that people would shoot through them, as opposed to, just blindly coming through the door. Here we see a more violent end to the standoff. Defenders draped over their fortifications, blood on the floor, and bodies lying sprawled where they seem to have been cut down in a dash to the kitchen. One in the corner seems to have died while trying to hide behind one of the booths, though whether they were an attacker or defender, we don't know. Inside this room, we get a total of 7 bodies, bringing the total now to 26, and we're not done just yet. Inside we find 2 final bodies, for a total of 28, with the one at the far end looking like they made a mad dash for the fridge that didn't quite work out in the end. Whatever it was they were trying to make their last meal, I hope it was worth it. 9 victims over this one control point, with their executioners unknown. Recall we only know of 4 that survived this, so unless everyone in this room took each other out, then a lot of the blood must be on the hands of the 4 that survived at the end. We can't even be sure it was the Justice Bloc, or if another bloc wised up and tried to secure some targets for themselves. I think it's unlikely, given the small amount of ground to cover and that they have no means to prepare unless they also consider doing the same. If you're also confused as to where all these sandbags keep coming from, don't worry, I am as well, and I haven't a clue where they got them from. Seems like a weird thing to keep stocked in the vaults, or at least it's odd they still had enough after all this time. The last place to look at in this section is the atrium. Here we can see where the supposed democracy of the vault occurred. The room is built on 2 levels, with the tables that I imagine the bloc representatives or other officials would sit at, and the common peasants got stuck in the nosebleeds above, watching their representatives make their lives worse and abuse their power, and then turn around and blame the people they didn't vote for. Yes, it's a very good thing people don't do this in real life, isn't it? There's 10 tables in the bottom level, with having most, if not all, their seating spaces occupied, making it possible that 40 people could have been taking part down here. Up top we have 2 rows of 15 chairs, broken up into groupings of 3. So given this was built into the vault, 70 people overall were intended for this room. We'll assume that only those over 18 were allowed to participate. Again, this doesn't really match with what we saw in the living quarters, but this atrium is definitely different from those we see in other vaults, for sure. Recalling Vault 22, before all the killer plants and trees and reanimated corpses, it was just a lovely common area that linked the living quarters with the rest of the vaults. While here, this seems to be where debate, discussion, and likely the overseer elections were held. But whether this was the intended purpose from the start or not, we need to look at one of the last entries we can find here. On this upper level, we can find a prepared speech from a meeting regarding these elections. This was from Gus Olson, Ombudsman, which brings the known people in the vault to 16. So we're officially out of beds, and it seems to be the speech he gave for the last ever vault election that put Kate in charge. He starts by saying that it's his job to both officiate the election and to chronicle it. So far so good. And then promptly drops the bombshell that the overseer walks to their death under their office when they finish their term. Excuse me, my good man, but I do beg all of your fucking pardons. They what? They die. Yeah, so that's it. There it is. The overseer was elected, governed for a year, and then knowingly walked to their deaths under the office. Doesn't seem to have been a secret, or at least it isn't now. He goes on to say that they chronicle these elections, so either someone from the outside will find them one day, or an as of yet encountered race of super beings. Either Gus was in the know or a bit mental. I feel like the Zetans would just think it was humanity up to their usual bullshit if they came across this vault. Og Qualtoth would surely be pleased at the literal continued sacrifice of the overseers. Which, yeah, we'll get to that. But moving on, this entry really is a big old lore dump. Apparently they've been told the vault mainframe will kill everyone in the vaults if they don't present a sacrifice. We'll get to the how of this later. He seems to think they record all of this to get an answer, and to be fair, it is a very reasonable question. Remember, this is all an experiment, or at least appears to be an experiment. Elect somebody to die in place of the rest of the vaults. But the dwellers didn't know this coming in. It was all new information for them. Or at least it was before the first year. But again, getting sidetracked. Gus then goes on to call out the infestation of the voting blocks, which implies a democratic system, such as it was different at one point. He then just casually drops that smuggling and drug trafficking were happening, and, well, also what happened with Kate, but that came out later. Also, what does he mean smuggling and drug trafficking? Ooh, the Great Silk Road running from the cafeteria to the second bedroom on the fucking left in the men's dorm. I don't think the vault is large enough to call this smuggling, unless of course somebody was hiding things up their ass just for the fun of it. He then goes on to say that the first overseer told the vault citizens and they understandably got pissed, but he implies the democratic system was something the people demanded, and the original means of choosing could have been different. It is an interesting point to bring up whether or not the first overseer knew what was happening going in. No one else was told what was going to happen, yet the overseer knew at some points and told the people of the vaults, but they may not have known or predicted what was going to happen. Gus goes on to say the people decided to elect someone to be sacrificed, which means that, initially, there doesn't seem to have been a system in place. The comment of washing their hands implies that somehow, some way, the vaults would have to get a sacrifice down there, but the overseer wasn't necessarily meant to die. Understandably, the first election placed the overseer at the top of that list, and from then on, the election didn't just choose a sacrifice. The person who was chosen was to lead the vaults, and then walk down beneath the overseer's office to fulfill their final role. In the first case, they seem to have forced him down after they got the password. A password we can still use, by the way. He cried, which is understandable, but really this is some good old-fashioned Darwinism at work here. They really should have seen it coming. Gus finishes off by saying that he believes they've just went along with this system because they don't feel they have another choice. Although, given the consequences of not doing so, you can see why they would. But keep this idea of choice in the back of your mind for now. He says to look back on a time, not too long ago, when they didn't have to be quite so ashamed. This, along with another piece of evidence we get later, opens up the possibility that this vault hasn't actually been isolated or locked up from the world for too long when all this happened, which could make the resource and space issues make a little more sense. Gus was also a pretty ballsy boy saying all this, as you'd think, given he just shit on the entire voting bloc, that there might be a risk he'd go to the top of the list. But he wasn't on the do-good list, so we can assume he got to say all this and get away with it. Assuming, of course, this was the speech from last year, as there were to be no more elections the following year, and Kate was elected previously. This is also likely the reason why no one ever tried to change the system. They were worried that, if they tried to rock the boat, the voting blocs would feel threatened and endorse them to get them out of the way. So this was it. This was the big experiment. Threaten people to death to see if they can be pushed to sacrifice one of their own. Possibly with the goal of finding out what type of system will emerge when they do it, and how long you can push people to do this. It could actually have also doubled as a way to either control the population, or for planned obsolescence of the vaults. I mean, if one person dies every year, then, unless the birth rates were high enough to compensate, you quickly run out of adults to run the vaults and reproduce. As such, the genetic diversity of the vault could start to drop off. Now, I hope to God there wasn't an age restriction on who could be sacrificed. And I say this not because it would be better if someone who was younger died, but you just know if they had to introduce this rule themselves, it means someone seriously considered it, and that's pretty fucked up. Because, well, you know, provided someone's born every year, then you've got someone else to sacrifice. But either Vault-Tec wouldn't allow this, or these people had better morals, thank God. Or they just aren't as disturbed as I am. Or once a rule is added, it can't easily be changed. To that end, I don't understand why the person Roy was talking to said Kate couldn't change her fate. Originally, the Overseer is not the one who had to die, but then that means there isn't any actual rule. So the question then becomes why Kate could introduce this rule in the first place, and why that person was worried if they got randomly chosen. They said they needed power to be turned over to them to avoid it. So was the mainframe of the vault inclined to obey the rules set up by the Overseer? The likely answer is people would never agree to the Overseer overruling their death, but then if the mainframe has to listen to the Overseer regarding choice, why couldn't she change it? Then people would have to listen. Really, we don't seem to have enough information on just what role the vault systems actually played in enforcing all this, so let's go see if we can't find some. All that's left to us now is to, like the Overseers of old, step down into the passage beneath the Overseer's office and see what was really going on. Inside the office, an old tripwire trap has been set up, presumably by Kate, as the new Overseer doesn't seem to have taken power, likely in response to the vault going sideways, let's be honest. Though surprisingly, there's no body here, just an office desk and a terminal. Like many Overseer's offices, they have a viewing port out onto the rest of the vaults, or the atrium in this case, but I feel like this takes on a darker meaning in this vault. As the Overseer, you were selected by these people to die, to give the last year of your life in service, and then to voluntarily end it, so they can keep on living. And outside your office window, you just get to watch them go about their lives, knowing yours will end. I wonder if, in the past, did other Overseers try and tear everything down like Kate did? If so, why didn't it work back then, but this time it did? The point could also be made about how much they phoned it in. I mean, if you're told you're going to die, and you have to manage the lives of these people for a year, how much effort would you really put in? But we've put it off long enough. It's time to step into the shoes of the Overseers of old, and head down the stairs. On this terminal, we can open the passageway beneath the office. There's a staircase leading down into a long corridor, and an automated sequence plays out that I will show in just a minute. Before that, there's some blood in a coffee cup. Now, who this belonged to is unknown. The obvious candidate would be either Kate or whomever was elected after her, but they don't seem to have taken power. The blood implies they were injured to some degree, likely in the resulting chaos of the vaults, but there isn't a body, so now we have to go deeper in, and, taking on the role of Overseer, see what happens when we do.
The light is calming and puts your mind at ease. Go to the light. Welcome. Please sit in the chair. The show is about to begin. Greetings, martyr, and welcome. If you're here now, it means you've been offered up as a sacrifice so that your vault can continue to thrive. Currently, you may be feeling sad or angry. Perhaps you never got to have grandkids, or to enjoy the pleasures of a fresh cigar. But march with your chin held high, soldier, and remember that each of us has an important role to play. For some people, their role might be to heal the sick. For others, it might mean they will drive a race car or fly a rocket ship. And some of us are meant to forfeit our lives for the good of the people. Sure, it might not be as fun as driving a race car, but it's every bit as important. Let's take a moment to reflect on the moments that made your life worth living. Think about that time you kissed your steady girl for the first time under the bleachers at the big game. Or when you snuck out after curfew to catch that new flick that your parents wouldn't let you see because it was too scary. Boy, were they right. And who could forget when you met the love of your life? What a looker. These are just examples. Do you feel that feeling stirring in your chest as you think of these things? Good. What you are feeling is peace. You've led a great life. Living it has been its own reward. But it is only the beginning. Close your eyes now, and imagine what joys await you in the next life. The afterlife. Can you see them? Good.
Well, holy shit, that escalated quickly. So in typical Vault-Tec fashion, the Overseer doesn't get some dignified, merciful death. They get cut to ribbons using high-caliber rounds, or burned with laser fire. This is what I was referring to, by the way, when I said the ammunition upstairs may have had a role to play. Reloading the robots that are going to kill you might be a required job. And the projector remains intact through all of this, forged by dwarves from Mithril, some say. The movie, or slideshow, is also completely tone-deaf. Not because it's trying to put the mind at ease of someone who, at least in recent years, was likely on the receiving end of a not insignificant amount of corruption, and was also going to die, but the strange examples. It's for this reason that I think that, maybe, this vault wasn't expected to last this long, or more specifically, that the practice of martyrdom wasn't meant to. What I mean by this is that it's given examples of before the Dwellers entered the vaults, kissing at a football game, going to the movies. These are all things from before atomic fire engulfed the world. And, to be honest, so is driving in a race car and flying in a rocket. After 2 generations, the inhabitants likely wouldn't even have a reference point for these anymore. Now we could just put this down to more Vault-Tec incompetence, but what if it's more than that? What if Vault-Tec always expected the people coming down here to know what they were talking about? But more on that in a minute. Looking around, we can also see what happened to the other Overseers as well. Surrounding the charging ports of all the robots here are corpses. To the right as we enter there are 7 bodies, and on the other side near the mainframe, which we'll get to, there are another 8, for a total of 15 bodies. This leaves us with 3 possibilities. Either the bodies are being cleaned up somehow, possibly by the robots. Only 15 years passed before this vault went tits up. Or this is more infighting, which we'll get to. Throughout our exploration here, it's been quite difficult to nail down a timeline. How long before the blocks took power? How long before they started to become corrupt? How many walked to their deaths? I mean, from the way Gus was talking, the first election was something in the distant past. But if it's only been 15 years, they should all remember it. Hell, most of them should have voted for it. He also mentioned a time not too far in the past when they weren't ashamed. But this could have just been before the blocks got as bad as they did, and all the smuggling rings and blackmail started. So I think it's more likely that the bodies down here are just to show that others did die, as opposed to being a true representation of the number of deaths. We don't know of Kate's bodies in here, or anyone else we've learned about, as we never did find out if power was handed over to stop this, or if not, who was picked. We can, however, head to the mainframe that controls the vault, and indeed the sacrifice process. The mainframe that is in charge of whether or not this vault lives or dies, depending on their choices. On it, we can override the lockdown and get 2 recordings. The system recording the Vault 11 solution, and the automated response to this recording. We'll take a listen to both, as they make this story far, far worse.
Alright, I know you can hear me, so listen up. There's 5 of us left. 5 out of I don't know how many. So, it's over. We've talked and it's over. We're not gonna send anybody to die anymore. So shut off our water, our gases, or do whatever it is you're programmed to do. But we're done listening to you. Congratulations, citizens of Vault 11. You have made the decision not to sacrifice one of your own. You can walk with your head held high, knowing that your commitment to human life is a shining example to us all. And to make that feeling of pride even sweeter, I have some exciting news. Despite what you were led to believe, the population of Vault 11 is not going to be exterminated for its disobedience. Instead, the mechanism to open the main vault door has now been enabled, and you can come and go at your leisure. But not so fast. Be sure to check with your overseer to find out if it's safe to leave. Here at Vault-Tec, your safety is our #1 priority.
Jesus fucking Christ. You know, this is bad, like heartbreakingly bad, but that final line of their safety being their #1 priority, ooh, that's a nice wound you've got there, friendo. Can I grind this salt-coated lemon into it? So this was it. The real, true experiment. Will people make the right choice? Will they choose, in direct contradiction to pretty much any example in human history you care to point to, not to put the needs of the many first? Or even, you know, their own personal needs? Will they be this shining example? That was the phrase that seemed to have broken the 4 of them. Now, I know what you're already saying, the tape said 5. Yes, it did, and that's very odd. We got 4 voices in the recording at the beginning, and the quest said 4 corpses, and we only found 4. So then, what happened to the 5th person? I did mention at the start that the deaths were a little odd, and we did hear someone at the end of the tape too. The shots were also in very quick succession, so there could have been a 5th party who stayed silent, killed them all, then dropped the gun and left, or this could just be a mistake in the tape. Getting back to the tape, they resolutely said no, they were done. They had made their peace and were ready for the same fate as everyone else, dead at each other's hands in a mad scramble to hold on to power and maintain the status quo. And then psych, it was all a prank. We weren't really going to kill all of you. Who would lock a large population inside a bunker underground just to kill them all on a whim? You silly geese. They were the only ones who passed the test, who were, according to the mainframe that had allegedly been threatening them all these years, a shining example. So they got to live, which, as we now know, made the decision to die even stronger. Keep in mind this vault was a war zone. We can't be sure who the 5 were, even if one of them sounds like the person who talked to Roy, but they likely had families and friends, people they either had to watch die or even kill themselves. The survivor guilt is probably why they made the choice they did. Recall the infirmary. People were being brought back up out of the fighting, so it's likely that enough people had died in their opinion, and they, all possibly on different sides, just decided to stop. With only the 5 of them, it isn't like there was a future. They'd all be dead within 4 or 5 years anyway. If they hadn't made the choice, they'd be down to 4 people, and in 3 years, 1 last dweller. And let's be honest, I very much doubt Vault-Tec thought far enough ahead with programming the mainframe. And by this I mean, I don't think the mainframe would have detected there was only 1 person left, and tell them they don't have to die. So with 1 left, the vault would have died anyway. But all of this means that, for however many years, they failed the test that Vault-Tec set for the whole vault. A test that, well, I'm conflicted about whether they expected this to be quick or not. To me it seems like the experiment was more to see how long it would take before this would happen, if it happened at all, and what would happen in the interim. How far people would go before they picked humanity, and how few would be left when they did. Really, you could argue the reduced population would be the most capable surviving, as they avoided being picked, and they eventually decided to be selfless. It could also be said this would give some excellent data on how far you could push a population before they decided to stop putting their own self-interest first. But really, none of that works when the situation's out of your control. If the choice is either to take a life, or die alongside the person you'd otherwise be condemning to death anyway, well, it's easy to rationalize why it's the better choice. Another thing to consider is the test could have been a sort of filter for Vault-Tec. The dwellers can apparently come and go now as they please. So the test actually filtered out instances of the vaults that wouldn't make the right choice and put life first. So you could also make the argument that they were making sure the right people got released into the wastes. But I think that's naive on our part, and there was a degree of short-sightedness from Vault-Tec. That presentation was just too focused on examples that would be out of touch too quickly. Now you could say they just didn't think things through, and, well, I mean it's Vault-Tec, so yes, I bow to your superior reasoning. But also, as I said, I think they thought people would become disgusted too quickly with the idea that they'd make the right choice sooner rather than later. But here's where the source of corruptions in the vault came into play, with the blocks. We've learned about 6 of the voting blocks: the Justice Bloc, the Utilitarian Bloc, Divine Will Bloc, Allied Service Workers Bloc, the Human Dignity Bloc, and the United Vault Technicians Bloc, all vying for power within the vaults. We know the Justice Bloc held the greatest amount of power, with their leader Roy Gottlieb acting as chairman of the voting blocks. From the conversation on the tape, there was definitely some animosity and mistreatment of the other blocks. As Roy said, they never had the nerve to fight back. We also know they certainly were not above grave and disgusting abuses of power, given what they did to Catherine. I doubt it's the first time either, as Gus listed some pretty extreme examples of how this corruption was getting worse over time, but the drug trafficking example is still pretty funny to me. I know we can usually find them in vaults, but come on. Surely they would have run out of anything you consider trafficable, given only a small amount could have made it in the first place. Though that does possibly come back to the timeline issue, but more on that soon. On the topic of how the blocks rose to power and the creation of the blocks, it's an interesting one. We don't get any details, but we do know they acted in pretty much the same way as parties today do, putting forward a candidate, and then telling lies. Although in this case the lies played two roles. Either to convince you a candidate wasn't worth voting for, due to either indulging in harlotry, being a communist, or in the case here, both. Or that they weren't worth it because they bred like rabbits. But clearly it worked, or at the least the members of the bloc would vote on who the bloc endorsed, regardless of their own viewpoints. In this case, the posters and campaigning likely weren't that necessary, especially in the case of the Justice Bloc's vote. They have the majority. Now this could either mean they had the largest percentage of voters, or over 50%. We're never told how the voting process actually works. Not how the votes are collected, what safeguards were in place, or what the criterion for selection was. I imagine the computer room likely played a role, with votes being recorded in a terminal, possibly with a paper backup. But regardless, the Justice Bloc would regularly win. Although if the majority they had wasn't over 50%, then the other blocks could have dissolved to create a larger bloc to swing it, in which case they have no one to blame but themselves. I believe the timeline is longer than 15 years. Now it isn't beyond the realm of possibility that it took less time for the vault to collapse. I mean, people can become total creatures in real life in as short a period of time as it takes for their football team to lose a match. Given the added pressure of possibly dying every year, I can see people snapping pretty soon. Add to it the cutthroat nature of America just before the world fell apart. Well, they already knew how to be corrupt. They've seen their own government indulge in targeted propaganda time and time again, even going so far as to completely dehumanize once fellow allies, neighbors even, to justify their right to take their resources during the energy wars. So they already had a model to follow if they wanted to do the same in this vault. It would explain the out-of-touch slideshow and the fixation of certain values, like communism being evil. But then there are a few things that just don't add up. Why did Gus refer to the first election like it was something from the far past? Like they hadn't all, for the most part, taken part in that election? Why did he refer to a time when it wasn't so bad as it was now? He made it sound like this corruption's been going on for quite a while, but you'd think it would be longer than 15 years. Now I know what I said before, but 15 years is also a very short period of time for people to fall apart like this. I find it hard to believe they would have all, despite being alive before the vault, fallen this far so quickly. The response they had to the overturning of the voting system makes more sense to me if it was a more established system with decades, or even centuries, of law surrounding it. This would have led to the system becoming more ingrained, and the build-up of privilege becoming more gradual, but as a result, much longer lived. And so living without that for some, specifically Roy, was too much. Also, the count of Overseer Order was up to 745. Either each of them issued a lot of sweeping changes to the vaults in the year they all held office, or the actual count of Overseers was much higher. This is also supported if these bodies weren't even other Overseers. We know that the password, oddly, hasn't changed in all these years, so some from the blocks could have come down here to take control of the mainframe, or maybe the sacrifice process, forcing people to either go along with them, or they would stop any sacrifice and they would all die, in which case the bodies were being cleaned up, at least while the process was still running, and the elected Overseer death count, and as such the years this vault was running, were in fact a lot higher. Now we're finally ready to go into way too much detail about the space issues in this vault that are definitely just engine issues. Yeah, that's right, time to rant about the population. When the survivors talk about their numbers, they say they aren't sure out of how many, so this again supports the vault may have been larger than it seems, much in the same way there were probably more than 15 Overseers killed. As mentioned numerous times already, the amount of beds to bodies is weird. To recap, there are 16 beds overall, 8 in the men's dorm, 8 in the women's. We had a total of 16 people in the vault either named or at least mentioned as individuals in the entries. But that is not enough for a sustainable population for a vault. It's not even enough to account for the fact that Kate had to have been with multiple people of a single voter block, and that's not even necessarily everybody in the block. Hell, Haley was accused of being with multiple people as well, which would account for like a third of the vaults. 6 of the 16 were youths, leaving just a handful she hadn't allegedly been with. So the population had to have been larger. The atrium had seats for about 70 people, and this likely wouldn't have been the whole vault, but most cap out about 130 to 200. With numbers like this, a yearly death seems more reasonable, as, given Henry Glover, people also seem to have a lot of kids here. Something also to point out is that we never find any of their bodies, but we also know they died too, so they'd have to have been among the dead along with the rest of them. So the numbers could keep up with the yearly deaths, while also removing the problem of overpopulation. I assume there were rules about voting in people below a certain age, or pregnant women, or at least I hope there was. I mean, the kids couldn't run the vault for a year now, could they? Actually, that's a great idea for a vault. I mean, we did have 75, but it wasn't the same. Or was it 95? Anyway, to have had this many voting blocks, there had to have been a sizable population, and we know that between the 5 or 4 survivors and the 28 bodies outside the Overseer's office, there had to have been at least 32 people in the vaults. But from what we have discussed, there appears to have been a lot more, and they all killed each other. All of this because a subset of the Justice Bloc dickheads didn't like having a level playing field. With that point, we come to our last topic of discussion. Why this needed to happen? Why the need to grab for power? Why couldn't they just ignore the rules? All we know for certain is someone had to die, and this directive is out of the Overseer's control. But with the election, it seems like everything else about it is fair game. We know that Catherine was able to use the random number generator of the mainframe to select a vault resident. Now either this selected a name at random, or she assigned a number to everyone and it generated a match. But she needs some way to communicate this to the mainframe, and as mentioned, presumably after this selection occurred, it was locked in somehow. The main argument for seizing power seemed to be that no one would change it back after Kate went to her death. Not that they couldn't do so, as the initial suggested plan, instead of starting a coup, was to get someone from their block to change it back once elected. The coup might have allowed them to avoid getting killed, as the majority could again vote to have somebody else elected before the last month had run out. Otherwise, would they even care enough to change it back once that happened, as they are already going to die? But the haste with which they threw the plan together again raised the question of when she actually enacted Order 745. I still think it must have been very close to the time before the first random selection was to be made. Otherwise, the Justice Bloc would have acted sooner, and we know it was happening the next day from Roy's conversation. And it does make perfect sense why she chose to do it like this. I mean, she was clearly incredibly intelligent and capable, given she correctly predicted what was going to happen after she committed the murders, and how to use it to her advantage. So she likely also knew that there was some chance everyone would revert to the holiest of all human forms, apes, and trash the place. So from what I can tell, the mainframe locked in certain choices made regarding this election. Either a choice from all the people democratically, or a random choice that it made, but this could be overruled by the next overseer, hence the whole laws don't outlive their governments. But until that happened, they were locked into the random choice by the mainframe. A mainframe that, to some extent anyway, seems to have intelligence behind it, as it was able to monitor or understand what was being said to it, or at least the survivor that spoke to it did. Artificial intelligence has always been a strange topic in the world of Fallout, not the least of which because the hardware really shouldn't be advanced enough to run it. But it does seem to have made some attempt at maintaining the choices of the Overseer, or at least I would say that, except for one thing. The vault was free, the doors unlocked, the need for a sacrifice done. So why could we go beneath the vault and trigger this automatic process we didn't prompt? The recording was on the mainframe, which suggests they had to go down there to record it. But they didn't die, nor, as far as we know, were any of their members killed on the way here. Unless, as discussed, some of the bodies down here were from the dwellers. Now if they had just said this out loud and had assumed the mainframe was recording, then that's one thing. But it does seem like they recorded this on it, and the mainframe did indeed have an override that allowed you to leave. So why did it still try and kill us? They should have passed whatever test was being administered at this point. Unless it got reset for whatever reason. But that also doesn't really make a lot of sense, as it still had a record of the automated congratulations. And, you know, the vault was still unlocked. I suppose, though, we could just chalk this up to more shit engineering on Vault-Tec's part. So there it is. How democracy killed Vault 11. The people it put in power wanted to keep that power. They had abused it for far too long. Really, it was an excellent example of the upper right region of a fuck around and find out function. They abused Catherine, threatening to endorse her husband Nate for the position of Overseer, a position that meant death. Unless of course she did some favours for them, which she did, for about a month. And then the wee bastards, specifically Roy, sentenced Nate to death anyway. The Overseer had to go to their death once chosen, and the Justice Bloc had the majority, ensuring he would indeed be elected. This isn't always how the Vault was run, but it is the system that emerged because it allowed the people to decide who they wanted to die. Or more specifically, it allowed people the opportunity to avoid randomness. At least this way, they'd have the ability to vote somebody else in to die in their place. But this led to the consolidation of voters around certain beliefs and worldviews. From there, individuals were elected to represent those views and interests, and we got the voting blocks. The Justice Bloc had a majority, but we aren't sure for how long they held it for. But hold it they did. However, it was only slight, and this gave Catherine a great idea. She was going to lose her husband, and she'd been used and tossed aside. The people probably had some reservations about voting, hence the posters to convince people someone was a bad person. This way they'd feel better. So Catherine could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Get some revenge by killing Justice Bloc members, thinning their majority in the process. And painting herself as a villain, people would then feel comfortable sentencing to death. Their conscience is clear. Hell, even Roy said they might have a new candidate in this murderer. She laid out her whole Light Yagami-esque plan to the Attorney General, and she was totally fucking right. But what no one counted on was her overturning the whole system. She scrapped the old one and created a new one where everyone would be randomly selected. She threatened the power of the Oil Boys Club, and those Oil Boys were storming. Roy, pulling a total blinder, decided to start a civil war because the idea of equality and losing power didn't sit too well with him. The Justice Bloc then made a play to seize the key resources of the vaults, assuming, incorrectly, that the other blocks would do nothing, which kind of ignores the fact that people, not the blocks, but just the people in general, might take exception to this, which does seem to have been the case. The resulting fight seems to have killed off literally everyone else in the vaults, except 5 people. Or 4. I'm still not sure what's going on with that. Having decided they'd seen enough bloodshed, and watched what was probably most of their loved ones die, they said no more. They'd accept their fate, their deaths, in whatever form they came. Then the vault turned around and congratulated them for making the hard choice, after there wasn't really much of one left. Everyone was gone, and who knows how many went to their deaths before. All of them likely voted someone in who died, in which case they all had plenty of blood in their hands. The reward for this choice wasn't death, however. It was life. It was full reign of the vaults and access to the outside world. All for those shining examples that made the choice to put human life above their own well-being. It seems Vault-Tec may have been optimistic about the timescale, as it warns them to check that radiation levels were low enough to safely go outside, which would only not be the case if they had made this choice a lot earlier. At the end of it all, the people of the Vault complied with Vault-Tec. They were told what was required of them from the very start, and responded in a predictable manner. Well, predictable to everybody, apart from the first overseer, apparently. From here, as the voting system grew, so too did the cancers within. This led to the shameful display we saw in the final iteration, which was what brought it all crashing down. But for those in the wreckage, being given a chance at life, after all they had done and seen, was too much. And so, they decided to go out on their own terms, acting as the final sacrifices of Vault 11.